The goal of Data Transformers podcast is to accelerate digital transformation by bridging the gap between business outcomes and rapidly advancing technologies. And we aim to bridge this gap by focusing on data. I am Peggy Tsai, top 50 women in tech influencer, co-author of the AI book, and data governance expert.
I'm Ramesh Danta, an entrepreneur, a tech blogger, and AI enthusiast.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Data Transformers podcast. Today, we have with us Wendy Zhang, a business transformation data practitioner who has over a decade experience leading top priority complex data governance and analytics projects. Some of her experiences have been with Wells Fargo and Federal Data Reserve. I know Wendy, you're currently right now with FI Consulting. Welcome, Wendy, to today's podcast.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Ramesh, and thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Wendy, welcome again. So we are very honored to have you on the podcast.
All right, thank you.
Wendy, I thought we would first start with your journey to data and data governance, and starting with your current role. I don't talk about what is FI Consulting. What do you generally do there today?
Sure. FI Consulting, I've been here since earlier this year. It's a really great firm. It's a boutique consulting firm that's resided in Arlington, Virginia. We're very focused on a suite of federal as well as commercial clients. Our expertise are in the analytics and credit modeling, business infrastructure, and technology. What I currently do is that I lead my contract, and I have my own client who is the federal agency, and we do a loan portfolio evaluations for them. And it is like a credit modeling, but also focusing on the data capability assessment and enterprise data governance aspects of that. So it's very definitely I lead a very talented team who has all the analytical skills as well as the business acumen. That's where we really bring value to provide a more accurate valuation of the student loan portfolios.
That's good, Wendy. So from your progression, as Peggy mentioned, you went from a Wells Fargo working for an organization and now working for a consulting company which deals with multiple organizations. So what has been your observation and experience in dealing with the data and the analytics across multiple organizations as opposed to dealing with data of a particular organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd like to suffice that the experience is really not that much different. Because Wells Fargo is a huge organization that has so many line of businesses. At the time when I was there working under corporate risk, we're primarily responsible for CCAR stress testing, credit model building, and then my team was specifically working on the data aspect of that, and we're supporting the modeling team. But also at the same time, we were supporting not just a suite of models, but the models actually belong to many different line of businesses, and then the magnitude of the portfolios were pretty large. That just means that they're really large line of businesses. And then, as you'd imagine, in such a large organization, a lot of the line of business, divisions, they kind of operate almost like their own company. There are a lot of individual procedures and databases and then practices and standards. So it's almost like working with multiple companies, if you will. And especially, I think this is some pattern that I observed throughout the industry as well, that the only constant thing is change. Right. So especially with a large financial institution, not just Wells Fargo, but industry in general, that you constantly have a change of the systems, you have change of standards, you also have change of due to organic growth, but also merger and acquisitions. So it really is, working within a COE, but serving and supporting multiple organizations is very similar to supporting multiple companies. And coming from that environment to where I am now, I'm really focused on just one organization, but the portfolio itself is very dynamic. So if you're familiar with student loan portfolio, that is this super large, like, is like $1.5 trillion. That is 1/3 of the government balance sheet. If you think about that, like it has really dynamic portfolios in terms of the structure, and then the users. That the users will be the borrowers. They have their portfolios, and trying to simulate that and then predict. So predict the modeling, you're going to try to predict their payment behavior, and then you have to project that out for the next 25 years, if not longer. That's really also, it's very challenging, but a different set of challenge, but definitely spans across various agencies under the department.
That's really interesting that you say change is I guess a constant, right? You can only expect change. But I wanted to dig deeper a little bit, maybe more on what you currently do. You mentioned the loan portfolios. It sounded like you were doing a lot of quantitative data analysis or analytics with that.
Mhm.
And you also mentioned, if I remember correctly, like data governance, data assessments,
Yeah. Mhm.
data governance. Those are traditionally two very distinct activities that's taken on by two different groups. But it
Mhm.
sounds like you or your single team handles both. It's very interesting. Can you talk more about how you are able to manage those expectations and that type of work?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think you're absolutely correct. Is usually, there's a team for data governance and management, and who the like will be defining the standard and practice, and then carry that through for enterprise wide. And you have a separate analytics team. I would like to suffice to say that we're not necessarily making data governance policies, but we're examining these existing standards. And then my work at FI is very similar to Wells Fargo in terms of we're not really data governance like experts to manage the enterprise-wide data and the practices and procedures, but we're the data end users. And with any modeling, any predictive modeling effort, we always start with data. So the old saying is like data garbage in, garbage out, right? So how do you know your models are sufficient? Not just like from technical aspects of that, the conceptual soundness, the framework, but also you have to know your data to know where you're trying to model, but you also have to know that how good your data is. In reality, data is never perfect, but is it sufficient? And then do you know your risks? So that's why like when I was at Wells Fargo, we're under corporate risk because it goes hand in hand, right? You have to be aware of the limitations and also the implications of having imperfect data, which is just a reality. And how do you address that? Can you deal with some of the deficiencies by advanced modeling techniques? In a lot of ways that you can, in a lot of ways that's the standard practice, but in a lot of other ways, you just have to accept the shortcoming, right? And then live with it, but also mitigate it. And then I think awareness is really the key thing, being able to understand what you're dealing with and the potential impact, and then being able to like proceed with caution. I would say that's what we're doing. Is like the data serves the purpose for the predictive modeling, which is primarily supporting the business forecasting. Then we have to be familiar and be conscientious of what we're dealing with before we make the assessment, and then come to the conclusion that this is good data that we have confidence when using it.
So it's interesting. So Wendy, at Wells Fargo, you had the luxury of building the team from scratch, right? So you put the
Yes.
policies, you built the team. And so in some ways, I look at that as a luxury, right? Because now you could define it the way you want it.
Right.
As opposed to a consulting company where, so let's assume that the companies have a problem and they come to you and saying that we have a problem, can you help? But each of the companies is different, right? So their data quality is different. Their executive support to the programs also is different. And there are organizational aspects, like, so yeah, for lack of a better word, let's call it organizational politics is also there in terms of who comes to your organization. So what has been your experience in going from company to company? So what's your starting point? Do you assess the data culture of the organization? Do you do some assessment? Or can you talk a little bit about how do you deal with the differences in companies of the maturity level in various aspects, whether it's a data, whether it's organizational readiness and those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question. Let's start with Wells Fargo. Then I was able to build a data team in geographically dispersed. It was a luxury because I was able to outline the qualifications that I needed for the resources I was willing to bring into my team. But it also has challenges. It's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge in terms of like the COE was new. I mean, Wells Fargo was not new. Corporate risk is not new. It's been around forever. But our group was new, just out of regulatory requirements to convert from qualitative modeling to quantitative modeling. So the challenge was that it's new because no one has done that before. So it's like there were some skeletons in terms of partnership agreement, and then there's some kind of the end goal. We knew what the end goal was going to be, and we just didn't know how to get there. So as you can imagine, like along with the opportunity to start from scratch, the challenge is, you have to start from scratch. But what was also beneficial is that we really started from like, doing a high level assessment of where we currently were, where we were at the time between where we want to be, you would call that gap assessment, and then identify the key stakeholders and players, and identify their role. Are they going to be influencers? Are they going to be decision makers? Are there going to be people who can maybe do a little bit hand holding for us? And then how we're going to get that project, kicked off. So it's definitely that I had a lot of flexibility in terms of how I was able to define the culture, which was really important, right? And we also had a stakeholder buy-in in terms of like, we need to get this done. Having a common goal, and in this case, is just meet regulatory compliance and really help us get on the same page, buckle down and like define the plan. Not to say the plan was perfect, but we revised along the way, but we really got organization buy-in, which was crucial to achieving any data governance work, as I'm sure you have that experience too. And coming to FI, this is something that's already been established, but we are the advisors, right? Business advisors, and we come in, will really bring a fresh perspective as an outsider to look at what the department already had, their system. And as someone who has never worked on their project before, not knowing the portfolios, not knowing the, the nitty gritty details, but it's challenging at times, but it's also refreshing, by asking the innocent questions. Sometimes it seems like seemingly should have like very straightforward answers, but you might be surprised. Those kind of things that really help us be able to do a holistic, comprehensive assessment and also provide realistic recommendations for how they can address those challenges.
Mm-hmm. That's great, Wendy. And I know that you definitely have worked on a lot of data governance, have experience, mm-hmm. and you and I definitely talked about the differences between a defensive data strategy versus an offensive one. Mm-hmm. And you gave an example at Wells Fargo. Certainly with many financial services, it's a regulated industry. They take more of a defensive stance when it comes to data. So mm-hmm. love for you to share, what do we mean by defensive, and how can more organizations be more offensive?
Sure. This will kind of go back to my experience of working for the regulator, where I was not directly on CCAR, so I want to make sure that that's clear. And I was responsible for like a lot of regulatory reporting form, like the data. And the data it was very essential to the Federal Reserve being able to do a comprehensive analysis of the financial institutions. And I was a reporting lead. From that, and I saw a lot of like that's what you're saying, that defensive strategy is in terms of what financial institutions want to do and just to comply, right? So nobody want to be non-compliant because everybody knows the consequences of not being compliant. So being able to be on the other side and understand the regulations from the regulator standpoint, and then later working on something that on the other side as a regulated entity really gave me the perspective. And also, if I go back a little bit further, this is even before the Federal Reserve when I spent about 5 years working for Department of Defense and NASA, where I was also like supporting a lot of data analytics projects, data collection, analysis, and then the projects I was supporting, a lot of them were mission critical initiatives. And then a lot of those were depend on collection of data and assessment of, the data analysis, and then to be able to like form the conclusion in terms of how we're doing in this department and how are we doing with the regulation and getting feedback. I would say that the defensive strategy is something that organizations, they tend to only focus on what they have to do, the bare minimum, and they just want to get it out of the way. But I think, it's based on what my experience working on the other side and as a data collector and validator and regulation enforcer, I would say that in my mind, that data like defensive strategy could be something for short term. You do what you got to do to
Yeah.
be compliant, right? But at the same time, it could uncover like underlying like organizational challenges. For example, the regulatory requirement is really focused on having a single source of truth, and like a lot of organizations find that really difficult. And why? It really shouldn't be that difficult. I understand and concur that there should be like multiple sources of truth from your perspective for your purposes, right? And then this is something I saw in the industry as well. When you talk about within the same company, a lot of the system, they work in silo. A lot of businesses, right? They work in silo, which is fine. It allows for autonomy, independence, creativity. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to roll them up and to really assess your company's performance holistically.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do that, the bigger question is not whether you can fulfill regulatory requirement, which it is a big question in of itself. But then, it's going to reveal what is stopping you from doing that. Not only can you not meet regulatory requirement, then you have something deeper, a more disconnect like between your organizations that's stopping you from really fully utilizing your data. And how are you making your decisions then? If you're not able to holistically and comprehensively and accurately, appropriately to assess, your initiatives and performance, how can you know whether you are doing the right thing and if there are any hidden opportunities that you are not utilizing that you could be?
So it's interesting. So far, we are about 20 minutes into the discussion. And interestingly, we have not even touched upon artificial intelligence as a term. And then you've been using modeling and other things. So I just wanted to ask you a question, which is, it seems almost like I can't even go on LinkedIn, Medium, anywhere without reading something about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then I heard from one CEO, he told his team, hey, I want to do something in artificial intelligence. It doesn't matter. So in the consulting organization, so what are you hearing? So what's the pressure about AI, ML? What kind of pressures organizations face and what do they want to do? What are you hearing about it?
I would say the short answer is I'm hearing all about it. Just everybody is talking about it. And then, there's so many webinars and so many discussions about machine learning and AI. I think it's definitely something like every organization wants to start doing. But I think again, it's like the fundamental question is like, why? Why do you think you want to do that? Are you ready to do that? Right? It's not like so. what I've seen also in the industry, that where people just want to utilize machine learning, regardless whether that's appropriate. And I can say that in a lot of cases it is not. So depending on the algorithm that you use, are certain challenges either with data or with the outcome and interpretability, and those kind of challenges that just make it not suitable. So but I do think that it still comes back to fundamentally, the organization capability in terms of having the appropriate and good quality data to allow them to explore that kind of opportunities. Which is like, if you're there, then great. By all means, apply the machine learning models using artificial intelligence. But I just think like for a lot of organizations, there's still like a long way to go. And then there are different like principles and guidelines governing the use of that. I think like organizations should be aware of what they're signing up to before they they actually do that.
Wendy, that was very well said, and I completely agree with you that many organizations need to know what the business use cases are before applying machine learning and AI, and not the other way around. It shouldn't be technology first; it should be really business use case driven first.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard today and would like to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite player like iTunes and Spotify. And please do rate our podcast. Also, please go to our website, www.datatransformerspodcast.com, for more episodes, blogs, and information on our speakers. Thank you.